The Way of Shadows by Brent Weeks, Chapter 56. The antechamber at the base of the north tower stank overwhelmingly of blood and feces released in death. The bitter tang of urine threaded through the stench. Kyler gagged as he opened the barred door. A quick glance told the story. The men had been trapped in the room, ambushed by a crossbow. Kyler scowled. A crossbowman in a room this small? Then he saw the narrow platform by the ceiling, plainly visible in the shadows that now welcomed Kyler's eyes. From the way the bodies were scattered, it had been just the one man, shooting the royal guards and nobles like fish in a barrel. So this was what happened to the men who'd come to save their prince. From the streaks of blood going out the door, it looked like only one man had survived to drag himself away. Sickened, Kyler ran up the stairs. He found 6 dead Caledonians at the entryway. The rest of the story was clear enough. Caught in bed with his wife, Logan's clothes were scattered around the room. Logan had sprung up and fought. He'd killed 6 fully armed Caledonians, but from the burn marks on the floor, he'd been hurt or disabled with magic. Then, from the wide, sticky puddle of blood, it was obvious that Roth had either killed Logan slowly, so that he bled copiously, or he'd killed both him and his wife. Neither body was in the room. The Caledonians would want Logan's body along with the rest of the royal family's bodies, so the whole kingdom could see that they were dead, the line of succession wiped out. A torn nightgown lay on the floor. The princess, young and beautiful as she was probably in a room somewhere being raped until she died of it. Kyler tried to interpret in another way, his mind analyzing the scene, trying to ward off the shock of despair. Was it possible the princess had been killed and Logan was alive? But soldiers wouldn't keep Logan alive and kill a princess whom they could rape. Logan was a warrior, a renowned swordsman, and the heir to the throne. The assassinations of the rest of the royal family had been carried out brutally, but precisely, carefully. If the Caledonians were going to make an exception and spare one life for any length of time, it wouldn't be Logan's. Grief hit Kyler like a physical blow. Logan was dead. His best friend was dead. Dead, and the blame could only be placed on Kyler. He could have stopped it. Kyler could have killed Durzo last night. Durzo's back had been there, a target he couldn't miss. Dorian had told him. What pain hadn't he inflicted on Logan? He'd allowed the murder of Logan's friend, Eileen, concealed the truth about Sarah's and Eileen's affair, got him sent to prison for murder, and forced him to break his engagement. Now Logan had been forced to marry a girl he didn't even know and had been murdered. His wife of less than an hour, raped and killed. Sinking to the floor, Kyler wept. Logan, I'm sorry, it's all my fault. He reached a hand to steady himself and found it in the puddle of blood. He looked at his bloody hand, bloody as it had been bloodied in this very chamber 5 years ago when he'd finished his first solo kill. Bloody as it had been bloody continuously since he'd murdered his first innocent. This was where murder had brought him. It had brought him full circle, his murder of one innocent leading inexorably to the murder of more. In the last 5 years, he'd done exactly what he'd intended to do. He'd become more and more like Durzo Brent. He'd become a killer. He'd slept uneasily, so he slept light, so he was even more dangerous. He was always on edge, and the blood that first covered his hands in this very room had never been washed clean. It had only been added to. It was no mistake that Logan's blood was on his hands now. No coincidence. The Drakes liked to talk about a divine economy. The god turning weeping into laughter, sorrow into joy. A wet boy was the merchant price of the satanic economy. Murder begat murder, and as Durzo had said, others always paid the price. Must others always pay for my failures? Is there no other way? The blood on his hands said no. No. This is reality. It's hard, uncomfortable, hateful, but it's true. I'm breaking my own rules, a blur of shadow said. Kyler didn't look up. He didn't care if he died, but the man said no more. After a long moment, Kyler asked bitterly, Don't play fair. A kill is a kill. Durzo stepped out of the shadows. Kyler, I have one last rule to teach you. And what's that, master? You're almost a wet boy now, Kyler. And now that you've learned to win almost any fight, there's one more rule. Never fight when you can't win. Fine, Kyler said. You win. Durzo stood there in a long moment. Come, apprentice. Here is your crucible. Is that all your life is? Kyler asked, finally looking up. Tests and challenges? My life? That's all life is. That's not good enough, Kyler said. These people shouldn't be dying. Calidor shouldn't be winning. It's not right. I never said it's right. My world isn't cut into black and white, right or wrong, Kyler. Yours shouldn't be either. How world only has better and worse, shadows lighter and darker. Sonaria couldn't win against Calidor no matter what happened tonight. This way a few nobles die rather than tens of thousands of peasants. It's better this way. Better? My best friend's dead, and they're probably raping his wife. How can you stand by and do nothing? How can you help them? Because life's empty, Durzo said. Bullshit. If you believed that, you'd have died a long time ago. I did die a long time ago. All the good passes by and all the evil passes by, and we can't do a damn thing to change anything or anybody, Kyler. Least of all ourselves. This war will come and go. There will be a victor, and people will die for nothing. But we'll be alive. Like always. At least I will. It's not right! What do you want? Justice? Justice is a fairy tale, a myth with soft fur and reassuring strength. A myth you believed in once upon a time, Kyler said, gesturing to the word justice etched into Retribution's blade. I used to believe a lot of things. It doesn't make them true, Durzo said. Who's better off, Logan or us? Logan could sleep at night. I hate myself. I dream of murder and wake in cold sweat. You drink yourself oblivious, and blow your money on whores. Logan's dead, Durzo said. Maybe he'll wear a crown in the next life, but that doesn't do him much good now, does it? Kyler looked at Durzo strangely. And you're the one who says life is empty, meaningless, that we don't take anything of value when we take a life. Look how you hold on to yours, you fucking hypocrite. Every man worth a damn is a hypocrite. Durzo reached into a breast pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. If you kill me, this is for you. It explains things. Consider it your inheritance. If I kill you, well, when I die, I'll take a break on my way to the lowest plains of hell and stop to talk. Durzo tucked the paper in a breast pocket and drew a huge sword with a long red ribbon dangling from its hilt. It was a longer, heavier blade than Retribution, but with his talent, Durzo could wield it with a single hand. Don't do this, Kyler said. I don't want to fight you. The wet boy closed on him. Kyler stood still, making no move to defend himself. Did you already give him the globe of edges? Kyler asked. The wet boy stopped. He reached into a pouch and pulled out the silvery globe. This, he said, this is nothing. Another fake. He hurled the globe through the window. Glass broke as it punched through the window and sailed out into the darkness. What have you done? Kyler asked. By the night angels, Durzo said. You bonded my Kakari. You stole it from me. You still don't understand. It was like he was speaking another language. Bonded? Kyler thought he'd bonded. The Kakari must have. Because his talent worked now, and Durzo said it was glass. Unbelievable, Durzo said, shaking his head. Draw your sword and fight, boy. It's my sword now, is it? Kyler asked. Not for long. You aren't worthy to succeed me. Durzo raised his blade. I don't want to fight you, Kyler said, refusing to draw the blade. I won't fight you. Durzo struck. The last second, Kyler drew Retribution and blocked. Talent strengthened blow met talent strengthened blow. The blade shivered from the impact. I knew it was in you, Durzo said. He smiled fiercely. Any delusion Kyler might have had that Durzo would take it easy on him because he hadn't had time to learn to use his talent dissolved instantly. Durzo launched into a blistering attack so fast it should have been impossible. Kyler staggered backwards, blocking some blows and jumping back to avoid more. Durzo used every weapon in his arsenal. His sword blurred through combinations, whipping the hilt ribbon into a scintillant red string. The ribbon's purpose was to pull an opponent's eye from the point of danger. Anyone who let his attention wander would find a steel reminder in his ribs. But it wasn't just the sword that confused Kyler. Durzo would follow a cut at Kyler's head with a kick at his knee, then a spinning backhand with his free hand at his face. Combinations followed and flowed into each other in a raging river of deadly motion. Blocking and dodging, Kyler retreated back and back. Durzo didn't give him time to think, but Kyler was aware of the room. It took up the entire top floor of the tower, so it formed a large circle flattened at one end for the entrance and the other for a closet. The very familiarity of fighting against Durzo slowly calmed him. Of course, he'd always lost, but things would be different this time. They had to be. The surge of power flowed through his arms with a rush of tingles that made him feel like every hair on his body was standing on end. He parried a thrust, and Durzo's blade was slapped aside as if it weighed a quarter of what it did. Brent recovered in a blink, but he stopped advancing. Kyler was standing a yard from the wall, with a cherry wood bureau next to him. Brent's sword flicked toward his eyes, but it was a feint. Brent's real attack was a kick at Kyler's leading knee. Kyler dropped backward toward the wall, lashing out with a foot, halting Blent's foot as it came forward. Expecting his sword to meet resistance, Blent slashed too hard. His heavy blade slashed deeply into the bureau. The stone wall slapped against Kyler's back as he stumbled and levered himself upright again. But instead of trying to drag his sword out of the bureau, Durzo reached over his shoulders and grabbed twin hook swords. Each bore a crescent-shaped blade over the knuckles, but was otherwise a normal sword with a hook point for catching an enemy's sword. "I hate those," Kyler said. "I know." Kyler attacked, still trying to adjust to the talent's effect on his fighting. So far as he could tell, it could make his muscles move more quickly and more powerfully, but there was a limit to how fast even two talented fighters could fight. The talent didn't help you make decisions faster, so it wasn't a simple matter of accelerating regular fighting. Kyler had to be more careful, and he still had no idea if the talent could defend his body itself. If Blent got through Kyler's defenses with the talent-aided kick, would it crush his ribs like twigs, or were they strengthened as well? The only way to find out was no way to find out. Blent let Kyler come forward, using the hook swords defensively. Then, as they neared the bed, he stopped using the hooks. As Kyler struck, Durzo turned his blade down to the hook and wrenched Retribution aside. He followed with an overhand slash with the other sword. Leaping backward, Kyler found himself being driven toward one of the tower's broad windows. Durzo strode in and caught a slow slash, but instead of sweeping it aside, he caught it with his other hook, trapping Kyler's blade. As Kyler lunged forward, Blent guided the blade past his head and wrenched it free. Retribution clattered on the floor behind Kyler. Blent kicked him in the chest, his foot barely slowed by the arms Kyler brought up as he drew daggers. Kyler slammed into the window and felt glass break, wood splinter, and the latch burst. He had the sickening sensation of launching into space. Clawing for something, anything, Kyler turned, twisting with the desperate grace of a falling cat. Abandoned to gravity, his daggers spun away, glittering in the moonlight. Kyler punched his fingers through the delicate window pane. His hand clamped on wood and jagged glass as his momentum swung the window open. His face met the tower wall with a crunch. Glass glided through the flesh of his fingers, then ground against bone as his hand slipped. Held. Blinking, he dangled by one hand. Blood coursed down his arm. Blood coursed down his face. He hung 200 feet over the basalt of the castle's foundation in the broad expanse of the river. Steam escaped from the single volcanic vent that opened on Voss Island and obscured a barge pulled up to the shore. The steam shone in the moonlight, and far below, by the ship, Kyler saw men talking. Even from this height, he could hear the ringing of steel and catch glimpses of Caledonian invaders overwhelming foot soldiers in the castle courtyard. Then Sergeant Gamble emerged from the front gate. He was leading the nobles and more than 200 Cenarian soldiers. They were trying to escape the castle, just as Kyler had told them, but even as they pushed toward the east gate, the Caledonians were reinforced by more than 100 Highlanders coming from the opposite side of the castle. In seconds, the courtyard had become the front line of the battle and the war for Cenaria. The castle and the city were lost. If the nobles were slaughtered, so was all of Cenaria. If the nobles could press through the massed Highlanders and get across East Kingsbridge, they could begin a resistance. It was the dimmest sort of hope, but hope had never come in the blinding light bright variety in Cenaria. Something popped and Kyler dropped 4 inches. He scrambled up the window frame as the next hinge tore out of the sill. The last hinge protested and popped out. Kyler hurled himself at the storm shutter tied back against the tower wall. His fingers raked over slats, caught. 3 slats broke, and then finally arrested his fall. The window sailed peacefully below him, turning end over end in the whistling wind. It hit the rocks just paces short of the river, exactly where Kyler would land if he fell. The window exploded into splinters and slivers of glass. Kyler looked up. The shutter's hinges were straining, slowly pulling out of the rock. Perfect. Durzo Blent stood in the carnage and saw none of it. Bodies were strewn about the bedchamber. Freshly cut lilies bloomed next to the royal bed, white lilies flecked with red, with blood. A delicate, once white nightgown lay soaked in a wide pool of crimson near his feet. The floor mosaic was scorched in a black circle. The acrid tang of witch fires smothered the hint of perfume in the air. But Durzo saw only the open window in front of him. His pockmarked face looked stricken. Wind howled through the window, sending the curtains fluttering and his gray hair into his eyes. His fingers flipped a blade end over end in his right hand. Finger to finger to finger, stop. Finger to finger to finger, spin. He noticed what he was doing and jammed the dagger into a sheath. His face set, and he pulled his mottled gray and black cloak around his shoulders, covering a belt full of darts, daggers, and numerous tools and pouches. It wasn't supposed to end like this. It wasn't supposed to be so empty. He turned his back to the window, then stopped, his head cocked to the side as he heard something over the screaming wind. Kyler willed himself to release the shutter with his bloody right hand. His hand found empty sheaths for daggers that matched the empty scabbard on his back. Grunting, he contorted himself to draw a tento from his calf. His fingers were deadened, lacerated, weak. The tento almost slipped out of them. The ropes tying the shutter against the wall parted easily, rusty hinges creaking loudly. Kyler stiffened, but there was no help for the noise. He took 2 quick breaths, then launched off the tower wall with both feet. He swung back toward the open window and heaved his body up with the force of his talent, as if he was swinging on a giant swing. The shutter tore away from the tower in his hands, and he barely made it high enough not to slam into the wall, instead sliding into the bedchamber along the floor. His body swept Durzo's feet out from under him, and the wet boy fell on top of Kyler, one of his hook swords going flying out the window. The shutter was between them, trapping Durzo's hands in an awkward position. Kyler slapped the shutter into Durzo's face. "I don't!" Kyler slammed the shutter into Durzo's face with all of his strength and talent. The man flew off of him. Kyler rolled aside and jumped to his feet, but Brent was already up. He kicked a footstool at Kyler. Kyler blocked it with a foot, but he caught him off balance and tripped him. He landed face first on a decorative rug. Running forward like lightning, Brent raised the hook sword. Instead of trying to stand or roll aside, Kyler grabbed the rug and yanked. Durzo lurched forward faster than he'd expected and cut only air as his knees collided with Kyler's shoulder. He flipped over head first. Durzo's heavy carved sword was still lodged in the bureau next to the window, but retribution was closer. Kyler grabbed it and turned. "Want to?" The wet boy lunged to grab the hook sword off the ground. "Fight you!" Kyler jumped on the hook sword. Durzo pulled up with all the strength of his talent. For an instant it seemed the iron core of the blade would hold. Then the sword snapped an inch from the hilt. "You might not want to, son, but there's something in you that refuses to die," Durzo said. He threw the broken blade aside, but didn't draw any other weapons. "Master, don't make me fight you," Kyler said, pointing the blade at Durzo's throat. "You made your choice when you disobeyed me. Why'd you do it?" "I wouldn't have apprenticed you, but I thought you were something you're not. May the night angels forgive me." "I don't mean me." Kyler's hands shook on the sword. "Why'd you make me betray my best friend?" "Because you broke the rules. Because life's empty. Because I broke the rules too." Durzo shrugged. "Catches up." "That's not good enough." Durzo tented his hands and pursed his lips. "Logan died screaming, you know. Pathetic." Kyler lashed out, the sword straight for Durzo's neck, but Durzo didn't flinch. The blade slapped into his palm and stopped as if it didn't have an edge. But Durzo's hands were still tented in front of him. The hand holding Kyler's sword was made of pure magic. It flung retribution out of Kyler's grip. Other hands bloomed in the air, striking at him. Kyler blocked and stumbled back as Durzo walked forward calmly, surging with talent. There was nothing Kyler could do. He blocked faster and faster, but the hands came faster still. Dimly, a few hands of his own talent bloomed in front of him and blocked some of the attacks. But it wasn't enough. Durzo drew him back and back. Finally, hands latched onto each of Kyler's limbs and pinned him to the wall. He couldn't move an inch. "Ah, kid," Durzo said. "If I could have taught you to use your talent, you'd have been something really special." Durzo drew a throwing dagger, spun it in his fingers, brought it up, and paused as if to say something, then shook his head. "I'm sorry, Kyler." "Don't be. Life's empty, right?" Durzo sighed. He was staring at retribution, gleaming blackly at Kyler's feet, as close as the moonlight and as far away as the moon. The look on his scarred face was anguish, regret. Following his gaze, Kyler stared at the black sword that Durzo had carried for so many years and remembered. Scowling, Durzo had snatched the pouch away from him and turned it over. The globe of edges fell into his hand. "Damn, just what I thought," he'd said, his voice harsh in the quiet of the Jadwin hallway. "What?" Kyler asked. It was a fake, another fake Kikari. But Durzo wasn't in any mood to answer questions. "Did the girl see your face?" Kyler's silence was enough. "Take care of her, Kyler." "That's not a request. It's an order. Kill her." "No," Kyler said. "What did you say?" Durzo asked, incredulous. Black blood was dribbling down, retribution pulling on the floor. "I won't kill her, and I won't let you. Who is this girl that she's worth?" being hunted for the rest of your short... He stopped. She's doll girl. Yes, master, I'm sorry. By the night angels, I don't want apologies. I want obedient... Durzo held up a finger for silence. The footfalls were close now. Durzo blurred into the hall, inhumanly fast, his sword flashing silver in the low light. His sword flashed silver? Retribution's blade is black. There was the sound of something metallic rolling across marble toward Kyler. He raised a hand and felt the Kakari slap into his outstretched palm. No, no, it's mine, Blit yelled. Kakari pulled like black oil in an instant. What had Durzo said? The silver was another fake. You stole my Kakari? Not a silver Kakari at all. A black Kakari. The Kakari Durzo had been carrying for years, hidden, covering the blade of retribution. The Kakari chose their own masters. For some reason, the black Kakari had chosen Kyler. Maybe had chosen him years ago, the day Durzo had beaten him for seeing Dargirl again. That day, when a blue glow had surrounded the black blade, when Durzo had shouted, No, not that, it's mine! An incandescent blue fire had burned into Kyler's fingers. Durzo had thrown it away from Kyler so Kyler couldn't complete the bond. Because once Kyler completed the bond, Kyler wouldn't call the silver Kakari for Durzo. Now they knew he hadn't called it because it had been a fake. There had never been any Kakari in the city except Durzo's black. And Durzo had known from that very day that if he let Kyler live, the black Kakari was lost to him forever. Durzo had even left it for him tonight so that Kyler would have a chance. But now it was too late. Durzo looked like there was nothing more he wanted to say to Kyler. Some way he wanted to vent his anguish, but he'd never been a man of words. Instead, mere paces away, he hurled the knife at Kyler's face. Time didn't slow. The world didn't contract to the point of the spinning knife, but despair flash-boiled in the heat of an instant. Of an insane hope in Kyler's heart. He didn't even notice his hand come up, didn't know how it had broken free, couldn't say how the Kakari had gone from the blade on the floor into his hand. It was just there. In that unslowed fraction of a second, black goo flipped from his fingertips and splattered across the knife, spinning toward his chest, like spit against pavement. When Kyler looked again, the knife was just gone. Ting! Kyler looked down to see what had made the sound. The Kakari was rolling across the floor, coming toward him. It wobbled as it rolled, and when it climbed up his boot and dissolved into his skin, Kyler felt a rush of power. With a mental shrug, Kyler burst through the phantasmal hands holding him to the wall. Settling smoothly on his feet, he extended a hand toward his old master and released the power arcing through him. Durzo was hurled away as if all the force of a hurricane had been unleashed in his face. He tumbled end over end, sliding and rolling across the room until he slapped against the wall. With a talent, Kyler caught up retribution and brought it to his hand. Don't fight when you can't win, Kyler said, and don't fight when you don't want to win, right? Durzo struggled to his feet and stood, weaponless. He took a ready position and smirked. Sometimes you have to fight. Not this time, Kyler said. He raised a sword and came forward at a run. Durzo didn't move. He just looked Kyler in the eye, ready. The last second, Kyler dodged to the side and dove through the window into the moonlit air, whipping the north tower. One of those men on the boat had been Roth.